Just looking back, you and Jan first began singing together while in high school. Was it purely just for fun in those early days, or were you driven right from the beginning to be successful in music?
No, it was just purely for fun, and I was doing it to at least maybe get some phone numbers. I thought, I heard musicians sometimes, get the chicks to get interested, so, why not?
I believe your initial preference was to be a part of a vocal group as opposed to a duo. When did things turn around, and when did it become apparent that the duo thing was the way to go?
Well, I'm still not convinced that was the way to go. Never wanted to be a duo. We always liked harmony and always liked harmony parts, and we would have stayed a group if the group had stayed together, but the group got distracted, and there did come a point when you had other things to do. Most people did, and you just kind of leave it behind. So it just seemed like all of a sudden Jan and I were looking around, we're going, there's only two of us. So, and there would always be somebody else that would float in and float out, but just kind of the last two guys standing.
Your music is so entrenched with that California surf culture. Have you ever pondered what musical direction you might have taken had you grown up in a completely different part of the United States?
No, that's a question I've never been asked.
Oh, there you go.
So now I got to sit here and think about how to answer that. Oh, I suppose, gosh, the only reason we did the subject matter that we were singing about, which was the Southern California surf and car culture, was kind of all we knew anything about. The other guys were singing relationship songs and love songs and all that kind of stuff, and we were 19, 20 years old, and I just wasn't. We probably just weren't motivated by that, and for lack of anything better to do, we just started writing about some of the things that we enjoyed doing. We had no idea whether or not anybody outside of California would be interested at all, but we figured, we could give it a go and see what happens.
Of course.
Obviously, it worked out.
Yeah, it did. Absolutely, it did. Yeah. Now, of course, your music career was temporarily halted in those early days by a stint in the army for yourself. Was it always a given that once you returned from service, you would slip back into working with Jan again?
No. I really thought I kind of blew it. But that was so early on that, we didn't even have a record deal when I left. So I kind of figured I had an opportunity. The military came to our high school and recruited high school seniors, and they said, if you, the draft was in force. So they came to tell us there was a program, Federal Reserve program, that you only would have to do 6 months of active duty, but then you'd be on standby call after that for, I think it was a total of 5 years or something. And it sure sounded good to me to go in for only 6 months instead of two to maybe 3 years. So a bunch of us in high school decided that that's what we should do. So maybe 10 of us all went in together. Jan was a half a semester behind me, so he didn't have that option. He wasn't going to graduate for another 6 months. And by the time he graduated, I was going to be out of the Army. So I kind of figured, I just put it on hold. Nothing's going to happen. What are the odds that you're actually going to make a good recording and get a record deal? I guess I misjudged that somewhat. Next thing I know, I actually hear Jan's and one of our other buddies' record on the radio, which was the song we were working on when I left.
Oh, okay.
So no, there was nothing written or even assumed. I suppose I kind of assumed, but I really wasn't even sure there would be any music by the time I got back, that everybody'd move on. Jan was going to go to college. He was going to go to UCLA, so I figured, once we got into college, you're not going to have time to do music anyway.
Well, but you actually did. You both continued your studies while conducting a music career, even after you became quite successful, which is something that's probably unheard of today. Were you torn?
Yeah, no.
Were you torn between career directions at any point?
No, not at all. We kind of liked it. Obviously, this was before cell phones and all of that. So once we were at school, the suits couldn't reach us, and we would pretty much be on our own. We kind of liked that. Of course, the people around us and the executives at the record company would go, why are you going to school? You could, if you stayed over here in the music industry, you could be even bigger and exploit playing live more. Being in school full time, we just really had time to record, and maybe occasionally, maybe every other weekend or something, we would do, maybe fly out of town for a day or two, but that'd be over the weekend. We'd have to be back Sunday night to be back in school Monday. I think it helped keep us kind of focused, actually.
Yeah. One of those industry figures that played a key role in your career in those early days was Lou Adlat. Tell us about your working relationship with him and what kind of operator he was back in those days.
Very creative and intuitive guy. He saw the big picture. He probably was the one that introduced us to the idea of branding. I don't even know if in those days they even used that word, but that's what he was looking at as being the guy looking at the big picture. We were just we were almost always focused on finding that next song. I mean, because without a song, without a good piece of material, you don't have a career. It doesn't matter if you could produce great records or you're a good singer. If you don't got the tune, you really don't have anything. So that kind of was our focus. Lou was also good at seeing what other writers were out there, and so he did function on being one of those people that also helped look for material. But he was the guy that said, you got to dress a certain way, and when people ask you certain questions, this is how you answer the questions, and find a style. So that was a little bit of a process, but once we found the Southern California culture, both in surfing and cars, then we knew how to dress. We knew, the laid-back Southern California kind of lingo, and we realized that would establish us as something totally different from where most of the hit records at the time were coming from, which was New York. So Lou recognized right away that just our look was enough to get us noticed, at least in the beginning, and hopefully we could find some material too. And luckily we did.
You sure did.
It all has to come together, though.
Yeah.
You have to all have all those pieces, and they all have to converge at that particular moment, or or you're not going to have anything.
That's right. It's a complete puzzle.
So I told Lou just maybe 10 years ago that when I probably visit him at least 2 or 3 times a year. I told him pretty long time ago that, in my opinion, that if he and Herb Alpert were not part of our team, that we would have possibly never had a career. And he kind of looked at me and went, "Oh, no, that's a nice compliment." And then he added, "Well, without you guys, maybe I would have never had a career." So we said, "Oh, okay." So it was a team. It was a total team effort, and everybody had their strengths, and it all worked.
Of course, one of the most obvious musical comparisons made with Jan and Dean over the years has obviously been in a comparison with the Beach Boys. How was your relationship with them? Was it a friendly rivalry between you both?
Oh, yes, very much so. And we never understood that kind of... the East Coast guys never really collaborated on anything, and they wouldn't even kind of mention one another. And since Jan and I had met on a sports team from the get-go, we always thought of it as a team effort, and we always enjoyed teams. And so when we met the Beach Boys, we didn't think at all we were supposed to ignore them or wish them ill. You know, we were intrigued. You know, we thought they were doing some really interesting stuff, and they thought we had done some interesting stuff. And when we worked together, we enjoyed working on stuff together. So very compatible, and thank God, because I mean, Brian Wilson had tons of songs that he had written for years before anybody, wanted to record him. So he had kind of more than he could do at one time. So we were more than happy to say, well, give us some of those things that you've lost interest in, and we'll finish them, or you can help us finish them. So it worked out really well, obviously.
And of course, you sang on the classic Beach Boys recording of Barbara Ann, didn't you?
Yes, I did, and that was totally by mistake. I wasn't supposed to, but I ended up doing it. And that was just a throwaway track that was on a LP, just to take up room. Just goes to show you never know.
You never do.
It ended up being, I think that was their second most successful single record they ever made.
Now, the legendary group of musicians known as the Wrecking Crew, I believe you guys had a little bit to do with the initial assembling of that group.
Yeah, I honestly believe that, and I those guys are pretty old now. They're even older than us, which is almost older than dirt. But they, I don't know if they were so busy. I don't think they actually sat down and thought about it. But I had to point out to them that the Surf City track was cut in 1962. And Brian Wilson didn't, really knew nothing particularly about studio guys. He used his own group, of course, to make the music tracks, and it took us to kind of point out to him that he could use these guys that we used on Surf City, because he really, really liked the Surf City track. We said, well, here's the phone number. Call these guys, and they'll show up, and they all read music, so you'll be able to cut your instrumental tracks in probably 1/10 the time that it takes your guys to cut them. And, who's going to know who played bass or guitar or drums? You can leave a spot open for, some surf guitar licks or something that Carl can do. So that'd be a little bit of signature parts with within the music tracks, but really, it was their vocals that were the thing that differentiated them from anybody else. So it'll be great if you don't have to spend your energy making tracks, then you can spend all your time writing all those great vocal parts. So we were a good year and a half ahead of Brian in terms of using studio guys. But once he found them, wow, it was his records got exponentially, much better.
Yeah. Looking back through the back catalogue of recordings for Jan and Dean, of all the hits you had, is there one that you feel has stood the test of time more than the others?
No, you kind of hear the top 4 or 5 kind of a lot if you listen to oldies radio, which I don't, because I have my iMac and I can sequence a couple of hundred songs if I want in the order I want to hear them. So I'm people. Matter of fact, my brother-in-law just sent me a screenshot of, I guess he was in the car and Sirius was playing Surf City. So I'm aware that that these songs get played, and it's kind of between Surf City and Little Old Lady and Dead Man's Curve. Those are the 3 big ones that seem to get played a lot. And they're pretty good tracks. I mean, if you hear those tracks for tracks that were cut 50 years ago, they're really pretty solid.
Absolutely, the production stands up in today, yeah, for sure.
Well, that's what you get when you use great musicians, and then Jan was really a great producer. He was up there with anybody, I would say.
Now, a significant story in your life away from music, and something I had no idea about until I was reading up the other day, was the way your name got dragged into the infamous story of the kidnapping of Frank Sinatra Jr. What exactly happened there?
Oh, those were high school buddies of both Jan and matter of fact, the 2 main characters that ended up doing that kidnapping were all in our club in high school. So they were a couple of our best friends, and one of them in particular, of course, came to me when I started making some money and said his dad was, I think he was part of the New York Stock Exchange, so the kid was being groomed to be in the stock market one way or another. So he wanted to sell me some stocks. So my stock portfolio, so I bought a couple $100 worth. And he seemed to be pretty good at it, and of course he had his dad to rely on too as well, also giving him direction and all that. And then the stock market does what it normally does, and it goes through transitions. And next thing I know, he's out of the business and he's going to do something else. So that something else was all sorts of things that he tried and then didn't work, and then he started coming to me and asking for loans to tide him over until his new job kicked in. And he'd made me a nice chunk of money in the stock market, and I didn't particularly need it. So I thought, hell, I'm just giving him back, the money that he made me anyway, or part of it. I didn't care. So I would loan him money, and damn if he didn't use some of that money and end up kidnapping Frank Sinatra Jr. He thought of it as an investment. See, so
goodness,
so it's a really strange story. It's a great story. I mean, nobody got hurt, thank God. And his intentions, honestly, were he thought of it as an investment, and he intended to pay Sinatra back. That's even why he didn't really ask for, and again, it's a long story, but the FBI were sure that when the kidnappers called Sinatra, that they were going to ask for millions of dollars. This was 1963, as I remember. That the kidnappers are going to ask for millions and millions of dollars. So Frank was told to gather up as much cash because that call is coming. And then the call came, and then the kidnappers told Frank that they wanted, I think it was $240,000. I go, where the hell did they come up with that number? well, my buddy sat down and figured out what he needed for a certain investment. And he figured he would be able to pay that back within 2 years, but he didn't want to, in his mind, borrow. He thought of it as borrowing. Was borrow this money from Frank Sr. He didn't want to borrow more than he could pay back.
Wow.
So, of course, the issue was that I had loaned him money, and part of my money was used to finance what he was doing. And there was a time when he told me what he had in mind, and I just thought he was I thought he was delusional.
Yeah.
And I thought whatever made him happy, whatever he wasn't a criminal, and he'd never done anything wrong, and somebody just doesn't decide to do something like that and actually do it. But he actually did it, which was obviously a shock to.
Yeah.
There are a couple of us knew that he intended to, at least he was planning on doing this. Jan did not know, but Jan got entangled in it too as well. And he had no idea why he got entangled, other than both guys were also close friends of his.
Wow. There's a movie in that story, I reckon.
I know. The screenplay's been written. Another mutual friend who became a screenwriter and actually wrote Rain Man, which Tom Cruise and somebody, I forgot who else that was. Rain Man, my buddy got an Oscar for that. Great screenwriter, and he heard the story, the Sinatra story, and said, "This is a great story. It's kind of a dark comedy.
Yeah.
Keystone Cops, kind of almost Monty Python-ish, but real,
Yeah,
but real. But I mean, when you think about it, it's absolutely silly. And when you think, I could just visualize that scene of the FBI being on a telephone with Sinatra, and he's on a telephone. They got the recording machine going, and Sinatra's been prepared for, these people saying they want $2 or $3 or $4 million in cash, and then the guys say, 240. Not even number. That would be a classic scene with the FBI all looking at one another and looking at Sinatra like, these guys seem to be a little bit on the loose end here, not playing with the full deck. It probably did confuse them because they had no idea why they'd only be asking for 240.
So, did the publicity of having your name implicated in there have a negative effect on your career at any point?
No, I don't. No, didn't seem to. Maybe the adults might have noticed it, but the young people didn't notice it. They don't read newspapers, and it isn't like cable. we had no cable and no internet, none of that. So unless the kids were reading, the LA Times or the New York Times, they wouldn't have heard about it. And it was probably only in the news once, maybe twice. That was about it. So kids didn't care at all. I don't ever think I was ever asked, even by a fan, what that was all about.
Oh. Now, you were involved in the legendary Tami Show, such a landmark concert film. Any special memories of that?
Oh, other than it was a really, really iconic piece of film, and we were very, very honored to be a part of all of that, and actually be the hosts, as you know. And I've been asked many times, well, why were we the hosts? And I figured out that, well, we were the only ones that lived locally, and they didn't have to buy it. They didn't have to buy us rooms for a couple of nights, so didn't cost them any money to put us up or feed us or anything. We just drove there in our own cars and drove home. It was 2 nights. They recorded 2 nights just in case something happened. So it was a neat concert, and it's kind of a small venue. Probably only held a couple thousand people at the most.
Yeah.
And most time they were doing surf films in the Santa Monica Civic Auditorium. So it was right in our own backyard, and it was a real thrill to work with some of those people. Most of them we had worked with before, so it wasn't any mysteries. But obviously the guys from England we had never performed with before.
Yeah.
So that was a kick.
Did the nature of your friendship relationship with Jan change the more famous and successful you became, or was it always just like the early days at high school together?
I'm sorry, I got distracted. What was that question?
That's all right. The nature
Somebody
of your,
called me.
The nature of your friend.
Cell phone someplace else. Okay, go ahead.
The nature of your friendship and relationship with Jan, did that change much the more famous and successful you became, or was it always just like the early days at high school?
It was always good. It was always really good. I mean, we were probably even closer as we went along. Probably mainly because we didn't really think we were going to end up in show business or in the music industry anyway. We were both working on other careers and planning on those other careers. So it wasn't as though, we just didn't make it complicated. And, we always got along really, really, really well.
I was browsing around YouTube last night, and I watched the pilot of a TV series that you guys had had in the planning. What direction do you think your careers might have taken had that series gone through?
I think we could compare what happened to the Monkees. I mean, the Monkees, we were going to debut. Our show was going to debut this same season as they were going to debut their show. Obviously, we had a head start on them. We already had a catalog, already had fans, and they didn't have any catalog to speak of, and no fans. So we would have had a huge head start on them. But then again, some of the same people that were involved in our show were also involved in their show, and we would have had the same relationship probably with them that we had with the Beach Boys, where we were friendly competitors. We probably would have been on their show, and they were welcome to be on our show, because we probably wouldn't go on at the same hour and the same night or something and actually compete head to head. So their show really, really did well, and I can't imagine ours wouldn't have been as good as theirs. So I didn't really particularly care for the pilot, and I was very surprised. I think Jan was surprised too that it actually got sold, because it was pretty corny. But we had hoped that enough of it was good that maybe, just maybe it would sell, but we didn't count on it. And again, we were surprised. I don't even know if we were pleasantly surprised. I think we started rethinking it when we realized, how much work that was going to be. The things that we'd have to give up. But then again, we thought, the exposure that you get, and we were getting into merchandise and all that kind of stuff, that maybe that would be a good vehicle for showing off our merchandise stuff. So we kind of just let it just kind of work its way out and see what happened. But then Jan had his automobile accident, and it never, obviously we couldn't do the darn show without him. So I don't know. I sensed that it would have been pretty good. We had some ideas that we were going to demand that we get to do, and if we didn't get our way, we didn't care. So we would have all the leverage, because we really would walk away from it. But I look back at some of those notes about how we saw it evolving, and it started to kind of sound like, we always did like humor. So we were going to do satirical stuff and probably do satires about other people's shows. Like there was a show, Route 66, about those two guys that drove the Corvette around. So we were going to do Route 69 and just drive around, for the whole half-hour show, being lost. Because we actually did drive to concerts from time to time, and somehow you always get kind of sidetracked and kind of lost. You'd have to go to gas stations or diners and ask for directions. And some of the directions that we used to actually really get on the road were classics. And we thought we'd work all those things in, and of course then have maybe cameos by all of our buddies. And like Dennis Wilson wanted to be a guy working in one of the gas stations that we would pull in and get directions. So we could have thrown all of our friends in to do cameo spots and just do a lot of comedy.
And of course, everything stopped with Jan's accident. Do you recall where you were when you were delivered the news of that?
Yeah, I was at school, and we were living together at the time, and we both kind of left his house at the same time. He went off to a meeting. Actually, he was meeting with the draft board. The draft board was trying to enlist him into the Army, and he had a medical deferment because he was actually in med school, so he had a deferment. People going to med school could at least finish med school. So he shouldn't have been called up by the draft board, but he was. So it was kind of a technical thing, but it still can get, it can make you angry, because you have to spend so much time trying to explain to them that you got a deferment, and why they didn't know he had a deferment, I don't know. So anyway, he left and did that morning, and I left for school. And next I heard I was walking across campus going from one class to another class, and a classmate came up and said, hey, how's Jan doing? And I said, oh, fine. It was fine this morning. Why? He said, oh, I heard on the news coming into school. I guess he heard it on his car radio that Jan was in a bad automobile accident. So I said, oh, that's the first I knew of it. Then I found a payphone and called Lou's office to see what he knew, and discovered that it was, pretty serious. So that's how I found out. And at the same time, I kind of went, well, I guess I'm really happy that I stayed in school, because if this is it, at least I have a fallback position.
You never really contemplated a performing career without him, did you?
Not really. I mean, we had the chemistry, and it just seemed to me it was a long shot. I wasn't really all that interested. I mean, we had a great run.
Yeah.
And I didn't feel like there was something that, that we were going to be missing out on, or we were almost there. But I felt as though, got a great 7 years out of it, and we'll just see where it goes. Kind of worked out okay.
So did it take you long to get your head around what to do with the next stage of your life?
Not really, because in school I was taking advertising design, and that was within the School of Architecture. So I was also learning some architecture and industrial design and all sorts of other stuff. But my interest was in kind of marketing and advertising and branding. I was fascinated with branding. I always liked it. And so I thought, well, still, I had close friends at school, but most of my other close friends were in the music industry, like the Beach Boys. So, of course, I went to the Beach Boys and said I could be their art director of sorts, and I could help control their graphic design and their what would happen was usually a record company would have all sorts of different departments, and the public relations department didn't know what the art department was doing. They all kind of worked separately, and I as an artist, that always frustrated me. Mm-hmm. I kept saying, you guys all need to be talking to one another, and we needed continuity and everything. And they didn't even know what that word meant. Mm-hmm. And each office had their way of doing it, and they didn't want to acknowledge any other office. So that was just petty BS as far as I was concerned. Their work should be working for us and not competing with one another. Mm. So I was never able to implement that in the Jan and Dean career. I did a little bit, but not much. And now I could at least explain that to my other friends that were recording artists and just say, you can demand some of this stuff that you want this done in a certain way, and you just demand it. And usually the president of the record company wants to keep the recording artist happy. He's not going to care about some guy in the public relations office, and the president's just going to say whatever my recording artist says. That's what you guys need to do. Period. Do it. So that worked out pretty well, because most recording artists never thought of that. So I was the one that kind of started it. You have more control over your own stuff.
Yeah, quite a career in graphic design, and album packaging being your specialty. What were some of your proudest moments there?
I loved the irony in the art department at the label that Jan and I were on for most all the hits, Liberty Records. I got kicked out of the art department quite often, They just say that, I should be working on the music and not meddling in, the art department. And I would just keep going. I would just be scratching my head going, wait a minute. We're the artists. We're doing music. You don't even know what kind of music we're doing. And we need to, if we have some sort of concept going, you gotta know what that is to incorporate it into our packaging. Well, they didn't want to hear about that. I mean, they were used to taking your pictures, standing with some sort of colored background, and then throwing some type on. I kept saying, "No, it's more than that." They said, they didn't see it that way.
Yeah.
So within maybe a year and a half or two, I was working with the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band, and the producer and manager of the Dirt Band understood that he needed to have full control over all of his packaging and such. So, he was buddies with the president of the record company, and I think he even got it written into his contract that he had full control. And it was a done deal. It was signed off by the president of the company. So when the art department said, "Hey, who's this guy and why is he doing it all off-site?" That's not right. And the president of the company said, "Well, it's in the contract, so you have to abide by it." So I was the one that was actually doing all their graphic design and bypassing the art department, and we would just deliver finished art, and they couldn't touch it, and it just drove them crazy. And the first LP cover that I did for the Dirt Band got nominated for a Grammy. Well, these people have never even come close to getting a Grammy nomination, and we did. And from that point on, as we got more control, within about maybe another year and a half later, I pretty much got all of them fired and brought in all my own people. Sweet revenge.
Sweet revenge.
And then that started the whole, everybody doing really nice graphic stuff and doing double packages with posters and extra things within their packaging that the fans would really get a kick out of.
Yeah. Talking about Jan's return to performing, was there a defining moment where it actually started to seem like a possibility to you?
Well, once the movie was done, Dead Man's Curve, which was a television primetime television movie, and if you think about it, that was 1977-ish, still before cable and all of that. So you only had 3 networks. Think about that.
Yeah.
So you only had 3 choices to look at, besides maybe local broadcasting, which was not national. And so you had 3 big national, ABC, CBS, and NBC, and so at least here in the States, probably most of the time, most shows were getting 30 million to 40 to 50 million people almost every night. So that's a lot of eyeballs. And so our movie came on the first time it was on a Friday or Saturday. I think it was a Friday night. And so it's prime time. And you had, of course, mostly parents controlled the TV clicker. So you had parents and then younger kids that weren't out dating. So it was parents that said, "We're going to watch this because these are guys that we knew about." and probably had a bunch of 8 or 9 or 10-year-olds up to maybe 13 or 14 or 15 that kind of had to watch it because that's what Mom and Dad were watching. And then they saw the hot rods and the surfing and all that. And so out of 35 million people seeing it the first time, half of that audience was kind of young, which was pretty bizarre. And then about 9 months later, it aired again, and it even did better numbers the second time. Again, prime time, so another 35 to 40 million people saw it. And then, of course, the phone was ringing off the hook. I'd asked all the Beach Boys, whatever Beach Boys wanted to be in it. I said we could find places for you to do stuff. And ended up that Mike Love and Bruce Johnston, and Bruce was a high school buddy of ours who ended up in the Beach Boys. So they were the only ones that wanted to be in it, and so I got them cameo things and speaking parts in the film. And they said almost immediately after the first airing that fans and media all of a sudden were asking questions about Jan and Dean, which they hadn't been asked about Jan and Dean hardly ever up to that point. This is some 10 or 11 years after Jan's accident. And they said all of a sudden it was just like everybody was interested in Jan and Dean. And at that point it was Mike Love that kept calling me at my graphic design studio going, "You've got to see if you can put something back together again and take advantage of all of this interest." So it took me a good couple of 3 or 4 months to decide, almost 6 months. And he kept calling me, kept telling me it wasn't going away. And I just didn't know whether or not to risk walking away from the business. It took me 10 or 12 years to finally get it working well and take a chance on doing something with Jan. But we tried a few things just on a weekend or two, and it worked really, really well. And then the Beach Boys invited us to go on the road with them. They had their own airplane, their own jet. It'd be easy for Jan because Jan still had some physical difficulties walking and stuff. So this would be easier for him to travel, would be on having their own plane. And I'd never been on a private jet before, and I thought, well, that might be kind of fun. So, and we went from hardly doing, basically really not doing anything, to going with them, and they were doing mostly stadiums. So instead of having to start at a club or at a casino level trying to make it work, we were able to go right from 0 to being on stage in front of 15, 20, 30,000 people. And obviously that was pretty cool.
Oh, I bet. Now, you wrote a book recently about the Jan and Dean story. How did you find that experience? Was it therapeutic in any way? Did it give you sort of a sense of closure on some certain issues?
Yeah, somewhat. I enjoyed writing it. Because a lot of it was kind of fun for the most part. Jan's accident was pretty heavy, but almost everything else was really a good time. And I thought it would be fun to write about most of that stuff because it really, 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 really was really a fun time. And I don't regret any of it. And to be friends with Jan through all of that, at least before the accident, was really special. And I wanted to see if I could write it that way and see if fans were able to feel that kind of, friendship and such. And I think it worked out pretty well. I think most everybody thought it was a pretty good read.
I see you're still performing with the band called the Surf City All Stars. What can you tell us about that group?
They're the same, basically the same, at least 4 guys, 3 or 4, I think. 4 out of 6 were there all through the phase 2 Janadine, in quotes, comeback, which officially started probably in 1980, 81. So 2 guys were in that 81 band, and then 2 or 3 came in the mid 80s, and they've been with me ever since. I kind of trade musicians with Mike Love. He ended up with a couple of my guys, and one is still with him, John Cowsill of the Cowsills. John was in my band in the mid 80s. And then a couple of my guys one of my guys went and replaced Carl Wilson when he passed away. But then it was too much work for him, and he enjoyed, being at home more with his family. So he came back to my band and has been with me ever since. So all my guys have gone back and forth with working with the Beach Boys in one situation or another. Yeah, it's okay with me. We're fine with that. So it's basically the same Janadine touring band. I think there's only one guy that really wasn't around when Jan was around, because he joined our group maybe 5-6 years ago. Even 6 years, that's a long time.
Yeah.
So most of them have been there for a long, long time, and they're good guys. They all, good team players. They all respect one another, and it's fun when we get together. It's fun when we work.
And just before I let you go, Dean, something I know has been keeping you busy lately, the Tiki Lounge, Jan and Dean's Tiki Lounge. What can you tell us about that?
I've been working all day on the soundtrack of the Tiki Lounge. I do live in Huntington Beach, California, which is kind of right next to Newport. Was one side of us, and Long Beach is on the other side. We are a beach town. I helped them trademark the name Surf City. So Surf City it's the official nickname, like the Big Apple and other cities kind of have their own nicknames and have copyrighted them. So we did get a copyright for Surf City. And then we do embrace the surf culture. So we're lucky enough to have a pier, and it all got retrofitted and redone maybe 10 or 12 years ago, so it's in really good shape. And a pier is really a generator of interest. People do like to come to beach towns that have a pier that you can walk out on and watch all the surfing going on either side of the pier. And there's a lot of people fishing and doing those kinds of things. Well, a restaurant called Ruby's was built there 25 years ago or so. And the guy that owned Ruby's was a Janadine fan. But the Ruby's, that was his mom's name. So it kind of was a diner themed. Mm-hmm. So most of it was from the 40s. So a lot of graphic things were all about Coca-Cola and things from the 40s and 50s. And we did end up putting a few surfing things in there, and some gold records and things, but not a whole lot. but we had always wanted to do something a little bit special. So this year we decided to take the second story of Ruby's and do our Tiki Lounge theme, which would be a totally different theme than the downstairs, which was still more of a diner. And the Tiki theme, of course, incorporates beach and ocean and all of that kind of stuff. So it's all Tiki themed, which is probably more 50s and 60s. And we have tropical drinks and all that going on. But it's a great view, the only view like it, probably within 10 or 15, 20 miles. You're out over the ocean, so you have full-on ocean views, and then you have the beach views too as well, and the U.S. Open, which is the surfing championships of international surfing championships, are held there every year. So you have all of that goes on, and right next to you. I mean, you can sit there and eat and drink and look out the window and see all the surfing that's going on. So it's pretty special.
Sounds fantastic. If I'm ever lucky enough to be in that part of the world, I'll make a point of dropping in.
Oh yeah, heck yes! You're invited. Any of your listeners are invited. All you got to do is show up in Surf City, and we'll treat them well. Oh, we just had a bunch of folks from Sweden that were do some sort of musical based tour where they go around to places that have some sort of musical history, and they came to Huntington Beach a couple of weeks ago, and we took them down to the end of the pier, and then they had a big thing in Ruby's, and there was about 70 of them, and most of them spoke English at least well enough, and they certainly knew their music, which was really interesting. So it was great fun. So we're open for business, John.
Fantastic.
So you can bring a group if you want.
Sounds like a plan. Wonderful. Hey, Dean, thanks so much for your time. It's been an absolute treasure, a treat to catch up with you and have you share your story with us. Thanks for being so generous with your time as well. It's much appreciated.
Oh, it's really my pleasure. And, yeah, thank you. It's always a kick to talk to somebody that's, doesn't live around here. So you're always welcome if you ever end up here. You got the number.
We'll be in touch.
Keep in touch. And if there's anything that you think of in the next couple of days, feel free to call me. I'm always around.
Will do. Thanks again, Dean.
Okay.
All the best.
Welcome. Thanks.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.